I'm going to go ahead and get us started now. So if everyone wants to go ahead themselves, I can kick things off here. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webcast. My name is Christine Dorsey-Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio Chapter of the American Planning Association, and I'm your webcast moderator. Today is Friday, June 16th, and we will hear the presentation, The Nation's Most Complex and Collaborative TMDL. For technical help during today's webcast, you can type your questions in the questions box located in your GoToWebinar tool panel, and I will do my best to help you with those. For your content questions related to the presentation, again, just type those in the questions box, and we will answer those at the end of the presentation during the Q&A. If your question is for a particular panelist, please state so in your question. That just helps us out. Coming up next on your screen is a list of our sponsoring APA chapters and divisions for 2022. Thanks to all those participating sponsors for making these webcasts free and possible to members. Today, we are sponsored by the ENRE division, the APA Environment, Natural Resources, and Energy division. So thanks to them for joining us today. You'll learn a little bit more about them in just a moment. We do have some webcasts coming up. We are almost fully booked throughout summer and now starting to book into early fall. So be sure to head over to our website, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast to register for these and all of our upcoming sessions. Today's session has been approved for 1.5 CM credit for live viewing. To log your credits, just head over to planning.org, log into your My APA account, and from there you can either search by today's title or event number. Both of those can also be found on our webcast website, again, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. And if you're on social media, be sure to like us on Facebook. That's where I post any important date or time changes. I also let folks know when new sessions are available to be registered, and I advertise each week's session, usually on Monday or Tuesday ahead of the Friday session. So be sure to like us and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Just head over to YouTube and search Planning Webcast and we'll pop up. This session is being recorded and it will be posted onto our YouTube channel. And if you head over there, you'll find that we have well over 400 recordings for you available to view free of charge. And for this link and all of our links and all the information that I've mentioned, again, it can all be found on our website, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. So again, if you have any questions for our panelists, feel free to type those into the questions box, and we will get to those at the end of the presentations during the Q&A. So now I'm going to turn it over to Alan Hatchie, who is going to give us an introduction of the ENRE division and a little bit more about today's webcast. So Alan, it's all you.
Okay, thanks, Christine. Hi, everyone. My name is Alan Hatchie, and I'm the Professional Development Chair of the ENRE division. I just wanted to kind of go over the division really quickly. We're devoted to a range of environmental and energy-related areas of planning, and our membership includes environmental planners and resilience planners, energy system planners, and any others who have an interest in the area. Really quickly, we're looking for volunteers at the ENRE division, and specifically with helping our e-newsletter. So if you're interested, please email the Gmail address we provided in the bullets, apaenre@gmail.com. And another thing, we're planning our next webinar in fall of 22, and it's going to be titled Web Tools for Environmental Planning. So please mark that on your calendar. And finally, I just wanted to acknowledge Stuart Steinman, who organized the speakers today. Stuart is a retired planner. He's a longtime AICP and ENRE member. He's been involved with the Chesapeake Bay cleanup for over 20 years. And he's had a variety of planning positions at the federal, state, metro, local levels, and also as a private consultant. So with that, I'd like to thank Stuart again, and I'll hand it over to him.
Thank you, Alan. The Chesapeake Bay is the largest estuary in all of North America, 64,000 square miles. Volunteer pollution efforts among the states did not succeed, and so EPA was drawn in. TMDL. I've noticed that every state in the union, there's at least one TMDL, so we thought that this would be a good case study for people, planners to look at. We have speakers from all levels of government today. We're going to start with Rich Battiuk, who is the former Associate Director, the Chesapeake Bay Program Office for EPA. He is currently the co-founder of Coastwise Partners. Then we will look at the state level efforts with Matthew Rowe, who is Assistant Director of the Maryland Department of Environment for Water and Science Administration. Then we will go look at the local county level efforts with Elizabeth Grant, an AICP member who is a planning specialist with the Cumberland County Planning Department in Pennsylvania, and the consultants for that county, Erin Latavik, a professional engineer who is the senior project manager for Herbert, Rowland, and Rubik. So with that, we're going to start with Rich Battiuk, who is an excellent expert on this subject. Rich was the Associate Director for Science, Analysis, and Implementation at EPA's Chesapeake Bay Program Office, which is located in Annapolis, Maryland. In 33 years with EPA and working for the Chesapeake Bay Program Partnership, he led the integration of science into multi-partner policymaking and collaborative decision-making, working with academic, agency, advocacy, and business experts. Rich was responsible for providing federal, state, regional, and local partners and stakeholders with innovative technical and programmatic solutions to complex, boy were they complex, policy issues facing restoration and protection of the Chesapeake Bay ecosystem and the surrounding 41 million acre watershed. Rich has now teamed up with the former director of the Tampa Bay Estuary Program as co-founders of Coastwise Partners to help with development and implementation of collaborative watershed management strategies. To date, they have worked with over 65 organizations across the country and around the world, all for only good food. Rich is also a member of the Chesapeake Bay Conservancy's board and serves on the Maryland DNR Black Bass Advisory Committee and the Chesapeake Bay Journal Scientific Advisory Committee. Rich received his BS in Environmental Science from the University of New Hampshire and his Master of Science in Environmental Toxicology from American University in Washington, D.C. Rich lives in Annapolis with his wife, Susan. Rich, tell us how easy it was.
Thanks, Stuart. Well, I'm going to capture this in a storyline for you, essentially. So going from the nation's largest, biggest, most complex TMDL to one that was actually done very collaboratively. So let's go ahead and walk through it, and then you're going to hear from my state and my local partners that'll put that full, complete picture together as well. As Stuart mentioned, it really is truly the nation's largest, most complex TMDL. Just a reminder, a TMDL in legal parlance is a total maximum daily load. Here in the Chesapeake, we refer to it as the Bay Pollution Diet. We talked about the Chesapeake, like an organism, it needs to feed, in this case, nitrogen, phosphorus, a little bit of sediment in there, but it has a limit in terms of the amount of pollutants that it can withstand and be a healthy ecosystem, providing economic, ecological, recreational opportunities, social opportunities out there as well. So in the Chesapeake, 6 states in the District of Columbia, as you can see on this map. All those different colors actually got a separate Bay pollution diet number for nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment. So you're off in New York, you had 3 for the Susquehanna. You were in Maryland, you had almost 38 different TMDL or nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment allocations out there as well. So imagine breaking that down across 18 million people, 41 million acres of land, working with almost 74,000 mainly family farms out there, thousands of municipal and industrial point source discharges out there as well. So not only was it a large landscape with a lot of different land uses and land cover out there, a lot of people, but a lot of different jurisdictions, 1,600 local governments. You're going to hear from one of my favorite in Cumberland County and Pennsylvania, but think of that multiplied times over 1,000. And that's the number of partners that we had to bring it to the table. So it was also the most collaborative. And I can say that why? This is the front end of the chart of my former partnership, the Chesapeake Bay Program Partnership. I was a US EPA employee for 34 years, but I truly worked for a state, federal, local, business, academic advocacy partnership. And it went from the governor at the top there to bringing in mayors and local elected officials and scientists, to fishery managers, to planners at the county scale, to advocates across the board as well. They were involved in the decision-making of this effort. In total, it was about a 7 to 10 year process to get there from start to finish, but you'll understand why as we continue. But I can say that it was collaborative, and this is looking at the underpinnings of the partnership. In other words, what we have is a series of goal teams that reflect the 6 goals that the Chesapeake Bay Program partners were working on. Then underneath there, we had a series of technical work groups. So if you add all these people together, you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of partners, from the business community to the advocacy community to local governments to state governments to academia, et cetera, were engaged in here. And I can tell you as well, having led this effort, 99.9% of those decisions that went into that allocation, from how many cows were up in Cumberland County to where the sewage treatment plants were down in Cambridge, Maryland, to how to look at the James River compared to its adjacent York and Rappahannock down in Virginia in terms of their morphology, et cetera. All those decisions were made by the partnership. There was one set of decisions at the end that our New York colleagues decided not to block the decisions, but did not want to put their fingerprint on it because of some growth issues. EPA made that decision. Other than that, hundreds and hundreds of small, medium-sized, and very political and basin-wide decisions were made by this partnership. How did we do this? How did a group of partners that were drawn from all the diversity of stakeholders that you can sit around tables, collaboratively making decisions that ultimately came into with the 2010 Chesapeake Bay TMDL? Here's what it is, and that is because we were working as we and us. It was not EPA, it was not Maryland, the Commonwealth of Virginia, or the Chesapeake Bay Foundation or the Pennsylvania Farm Bureau. It was collectively these group of partners through a structured decision-making process, collaborative decision-making that came out with the Chesapeake Bay TMDL, and not just this Bay pollution diet with the nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment loads allocated among the different jurisdictions down to a watershed scale and ultimately down to a county scale. It was because we were working together. And here's a set of agreements that we had to move forward on. We started with an agreement on what is an impaired bay. In other words, why did the Chesapeake not support whether you call it fishable, swimmable, in our case, good habitat for rockfish and crabs and oysters and underwater grasses, for things that were driving local and regional economies that were part of our recreation, part of our heritage here in the Chesapeake as well. So we had a tremendous level of science that looked in the past 50 years of an unhealthy Chesapeake Bay, and one that in fact we all agreed to, whether you're up in New York, you're in the Shenandoahs of Virginia, you're out in my favorite part of the country, out in West Virginia, that you all agreed that we understood that the bay was not healthy. We needed to get to a different position, and we understood the reasons why, and that is too much nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment running off from our city streets, our neighborhood backyards, from our golf courses out there, from our farmland and pasture land as well. So that was a first level of agreement. Second one, which was probably the most critical, and that is we got not only all 6 states in the watershed in the District of Columbia, but we got the Home Builders Association, we got the farm bureaus, we got the conservation districts, our advocacy groups, others agreeing on what is clean water for the Chesapeake. And not in terms of just You know, you can look down to the water, it looks clear. We got agreement on what level of oxygen we needed for fish, crabs, and oysters out there. What level of light did we need for underwater grasses? Think of productive meadows or pasture land. Those were critical to the health of the Chesapeake. We need to understand the quality of good food. That is a measure of algae, which we call chlorophyll A. We also, we were planners. We actually divided up the Chesapeake not by jurisdictional boundaries, but what things called designated uses, which in the Clean Water Act says, here's what you're going to bring back in terms of the ecological use of that particular area, the human use of that area. So this all got built into Maryland, Virginia, the District of Columbia, and Delaware's state water quality standards, state regulations. So we got an agreement on clean water. We had an agreement on the bay was impaired, but we also got agreement with our scientific community and with our politicians, local elected officials, as well as our governors, the mayor of the District of Columbia, the EPA administrator, on how to equitably divide up the load of how much nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment pollution did we need to reduce and from where to get to the levels that would be protective of a healthy Chesapeake Bay. And we can talk about this in the Q's and A's, but these two pictures on your left is nitrogen and on your right is phosphorus. It's a picture essentially of modeled information, taking all the different sources, whether it was from air deposition or runoff in someone's backyard or from a sewage treatment plant, a septic system, the back end of a cow, and delivered it into the Chesapeake. And if you had a red color, that means pound for pound, you're having a larger effect on the Chesapeake compared to a blue color out there as well. So this was an amalgamation of a tremendous amount of science, and then finished off with policy decisions about how you would not equally, but equitably divide up the responsibility for load reductions. And each step along the way, again, were agreed to, whether it's at a technical level or ultimately at the governor's, mayor of District of Columbia, EPA administrator, chair of the Chesapeake Bay Commission. One of the other places that not a lot of TMDLs include, and that is an end date. In other words, when do we want this TMDL to have been accomplished? In other words, when do we want to have the controls on wastewater treatment plants, on air pollution, at the back end of cows, coming off of our city streets and our suburban neighborhoods? The governors and the mayor and the EPA administrator agreed on 2025. We may not have the bay fully restored by then, but we would have all the pollutant reduction and pollution prevention practices in place by that time period. And the governors and the mayor and the EPA administrator also agreed to, by 2017, we're going to see where all 6 states in the district stand towards getting 60% of that 100% actions by 2017 as well. And you'll see the importance of that. And that comes into being very open to the public and being accountable for the actions that are occurring on the lands out there as well. We also, this actually came from the governor of Virginia, Tim Kaine, who was at that time a governor of Virginia. He was a vice president candidate, but now he's a U.S. senator from Virginia. He was the one, not EPA, not an environmental advocacy group. He came back to the rest of the states and the other partners and said, we need accountability. Each of our states need to be accountable. Our federal partners need to be accountable. We need to put a system together that ensures everybody's treated fairly. We have a level playing field. But if you're doing something right, you get a gold star for it. But if you're not, you get called out and you have to face the consequences of that as well. That was one of the most tough and most difficult things. And then actually probably the one place that in the TMDL framework and its implementation that we have not been fully successful on as well. And again, we have a little bit of time. You can ask some questions about this and how that worked out as well. And then finally, there was an important element, and that is all the states and EPA and all the partners agreed we needed to spell out implementation. You're going to hear from a state partner in Maryland and a local partner up in Pennsylvania how the Bay TMDL got translated at the state scale, and then most importantly at the local scale into actual actions and commitments to make that happen. Again, all these elements were agreed to. The need to develop what we call watershed implementation plans, the idea of phased over time, that we would go from more general watershed implementation plans to ones that were very, very specific to local scale. EPA working with the states set a set of expectations about what needs to be in there so that the public can read and understand what the states were committing to do. And again, the phase 3 of these watershed implementation plans translated down to either a county scale or a conservation district scale, depending on which jurisdiction you're working with as well. And then finally, this whole thing finished up in that phase 3 versions of those watershed implementation plans. You're going to hear about Cumberland County. I put a focus on Lancaster County, one of the 2 top loadings of nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment into the Chesapeake from Pennsylvania. But the tools allowed us to not only look at Pennsylvania and say, where are the counties that are having the most effect and what are the ones that are having the least effect, but allowed someone like Lancaster, and you're going to hear from Cumberland, to actually go in and look at their own watersheds and say, where do we need to focus for our own impaired waters and to help our downstream neighbors as well. So this is a strength of data. It's a strength of information. It's a strength of watching and monitoring the Chesapeake Bay watershed for almost 40 years. And it's the strength of collaborative decision-making that allows us to scale up and down and to allow information to be relevant at a whole host of different scales as well. So in finishing up here, here's the basic lessons that we learned from building a collaborative TMDL at the scale and at the complexity of what we have here. And that is collaborative decision-making works. Why does it work? Because everybody is at the table. They have an opportunity to not only influence decisions, but they have an opportunity to benefit, if anything, just by being part of that decision, but ensuring that decision is fair to whoever they may represent out there. That if you get buy-in to the shared decision-making by everybody at the table, then you can do that collaborative decision-making as well. And how you make decisions is important as well. And you're going to hear a little bit about that from my state and local partners. But you also need an infrastructure in terms of not bridges and buildings out there, but in fact, mechanisms within the partnership that you have experts at the table that understand hydrology, understand groundwater loads, understand effectiveness of agricultural stormwater practices and how they benefit, modeling, collaborative, etc. And then equally important, you need leadership and commitment from all levels, from our elected mayors that were at the table, from our governors, that for representatives from the agribusiness community, from the stormwater community, from municipalities, from the academic community, etc. They need to be at the table. They need to be sharing that leadership. They need to be part of that decision-making process as well. One of the things that was agreed to early at the cabinet secretaries of the states, of the 6 states in the district, and their federal counterparts in 2007 was a set of decision rules or ground rules of how we're going to go about working together like this. Those ground rules were very important. So everybody knew going into the game that EPA would publish it, but on behalf of the states, on behalf of the larger partnership. But everybody needed to understand of how they would work, who's going to make what decisions, etc. We needed to have a strong scientific foundation on which the decisions were built. We actually had an independent peer review process in place through the Partnership Scientific and Technical Advisory Committee. They essentially looked at every place we're using science, and to be sure that the policymakers and our local elected officials, etc., had the confidence that every piece of science going in here had been looked at and had been considered in terms of the uncertainty and where it was fitting in there. And then finally, probably the most important component in addition to collaborative decision-making was a very inclusive process. And read the words carefully. Information flowing out to the partners and to the public, and then information from the public and interested partners or interested stakeholders flowing back into the partnership to make decisions out there. I can tell you for the 2 years leading up to the TMDL itself, we had over 400 public meetings, public forums, public webinars to ensure that everyone from the Virginia Home Builders Association to the Delaware County conservation districts, to watershed organizations in West Virginia, up in Pennsylvania, to colleagues in Albany, New York that were looking at it from a state of New York perspective, they had opportunities to take a look at this issue and weigh in there as well. So a very open, inclusive process that was essentially a very open process for about 2 years going up to the publication of the TMDL in December of 2010. So I know that you're going to have an opportunity to take a look at the presentation. It'll be posted by Christine out there. My contact information is here as well if you have questions. I lived this, I breathed it, I slept this, but I can tell you it has its warts and pimples, but it is one of the most effective processes that I've been through in terms of the number of partners, the collaborative decision-making, the open nature of that process, and most importantly, the actions, the funding, and to the local scale, the level of delivery of that. And within my career, and I've been retired for 4 years now, but we've seen unprecedented changes, positive changes in Chesapeake Bay water quality, the underwater grasses, fish, rockfish, others. They have their ups and downs, but they're tremendously much more better off than they were in the 1980s. But we haven't achieved our goals because we haven't achieved the full TMDL at this particular point as well. So at this point, I'm going to share it over to my colleague, Matt, who will give you an opportunity to hear it from the state perspective as well. Matt?
Rich, let me, can you hear me? Let me give you Matt's very extensive and well-deserved bio, so you know that he speaks from authority and experience. So Matt Rowe is, again, the Assistant Director of Maryland's Department of Environment's Water and Science Administration, which oversees implementing state and federal water programs, regulating public drinking water systems, wastewater, stormwater, wetlands, and compliance, as well as water quality monitoring, standards development, TMDL, and non-point source management programs. Of course, with a focus on Chesapeake Bay restoration and building climate resiliency into Maryland's water programs. Matt received a BA degree from Eckerd College, Bachelor of Science degree in Environmental Science and Stream Ecology from Oregon State University, and an Executive Education Program Certificate in National Smart Growth Leadership from the University of Maryland. Matt serves the Chesapeake Bay Program Partnership in support of the Principal Staff Committee and as co-chair of the Conowingo Dam WIP Steering Committee. He is on the board of the Chesapeake Bay Trust and is a certified climate change professional with the Association of Climate Change Officers. Prior to MDE, Matt worked in environmental research at the University of Maryland, the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, and as a research fellow with EPA's National Health and Environmental Effects Research Laboratory. Matt and his wife, Rebecca, live in Columbia, Maryland. Matt, go ahead.
Great, thank you so much, Stuart. Can everyone see the presentation okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, so thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me here today. It's a pleasure, and to talk about planning and some of the planning elements, the importance of planning, but also how we're going to go about implementing those plans. And I'm going to pick up on some of the themes that Rich talked about with collaboration, but also try to tie in, you know, where the state role fits in, and then how we work with our local implementers to get projects on the ground. So let's see here. Okay, just a back outline of the presentation. I'm going to go through a little bit of background, then talk about Maryland's Phase 3 Watershed Implementation Plan, kind of how we went about that, some of the challenges and opportunities in that plan and subsequent to development of that plan, and then wrap it up and talk about some next steps. So just a little bit of personal context here, and to pick up on some of the themes that Rich talked about. I became more closely involved with the whole Bay restoration and TMDL in late 2017. So that was right at the midpoint. What Rich talked about is the midpoint assessment. All the jurisdictions were working with EPA. We had a goal at that time to achieve 60% of the pollution reductions. We needed kind of to be a little bit more than halfway towards restoration, towards our 2025 restoration goals. So at that time, we were looking at where all the jurisdictions stood in terms of progress towards that 60% goal. And also at that time, we were starting to grapple with climate change impacts to our pollution load. So at that time, when I first came in and kind of talking about the collaborative and partnership-based decision-making with that, the Chesapeake Bay Program partnership with all the jurisdictions was looking at and making decisions on how are we going to incorporate the increased pollution loads from increased runoff and precipitation, bringing nitrogen and phosphorus into the bay. You know, how are we going to deal with that as a partnership? So, you know, I can attest, kind of jumping into that point in time, that it was very much a partnership decision-making process, and it's consensus-driven. You'll see right here that in making decisions among the partnership and kind of like the ins and outs and the mechanics, we work through a consensus continuum process that you see here, whereby we try to get consensus and at least majority around the decision-making. So it is, I just want to emphasize the points that Rich made. It is very much a collaborative partnership process, and really we strive for consensus, we don't always get it, but really to move things forward, you're at least talking about like a supermajority or, you know, of people have to be on board with the direction that the program's taking. So very much a collaborative process. Also, as Rich mentioned, I mean, he talked about all, you know, when you think about all the local governments, the 7 jurisdictions, all the, you know, the various levels of government involved, you know, how do you provide consistency among all those bodies? You know, you kind of need to respect each jurisdiction's approach and their governance and how they get things done, but at the same time, you know, you need some consistency in terms of, or expectations in terms of what each of these local plans are gonna include and, you know, the roadmap to get there. So one important thing too that EPA did throughout the process, and for when I got involved, again, we were in the midpoint assessment process and then developing the 3rd phase of our plan to get to 2025. EPA puts out a set of expectations, and it's hyperlinked there in the presentation if you want to see all the details later. But to at least have some consistency and some things that each of the jurisdictions need to address in their plan. So I'm not going to touch on all of them, but some of them were, you know, there was an expectation that we needed to engage our local partners and local governments who were on the ground doing the implementation. You know, we needed to look, incorporate the effects of climate change, of growth. You know, how are we going to offset growth as, you know, we go into the future to make sure we continue to meet our restoration goals. And then also Conowingo, as a result of some infill over time behind Conowingo Dam, we were seeing increased pollution loads to the bay. And that was, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later, but that was something we were grappling with and the each jurisdiction needed to address in their WIP, how they were going to deal with these kind of these emerging issues. So really important to provide some consistency through these WIPs while, you know, at the same time allowing flexibility and being respectful of different jurisdiction approaches. So in Maryland and other jurisdictions too, when we went about developing our plans, we usually take a sector-based approach. You know, we'll look at, in Maryland, we looked at the agricultural sector. You know, we kind of divide the pollution, we divided it into pollution source sectors: agriculture, wastewater, septic systems, stormwater. We divided all the pollution sources into sector. Each state's going to vary. Like in Pennsylvania, it's very heavily agricultural, so that's a, you know, their most challenging sector to deal with. In Maryland, we have ag, but also a lot of wastewater contributions. So we needed to make sure that we identified the pollution source sectors, and in phase 3 WIP, you know, we had sufficient plans in place to reduce the loads in those various sectors to get to our 2025 restoration goals. So very much a sector-based approach to source reduction is central to our planning. And then specifically for Maryland's plan to get to 2025, we had this theme, or this, you know, almost a logo that we, you know, our plan is locally driven, achievable, balanced. I'll get a little bit more into that later, but specifically to hit our pollution reduction goals in Maryland, it was really about 50% of our reductions needed to come from wastewater, and about 50% of the reductions needed to come from agricultural, the agricultural community to hit our 2025 restoration goals. So that's really kind of the meat of Maryland's plan and where it's focused. At the same time, we recognize in Maryland's plan, we have to keep pace in those other sectors like stormwater, where we're having continued growth and development. We need to make sure we have best management practices in places for new development. For example, we need to make sure that local jurisdictions are meeting their permit requirements for their MS4 permits. You know, that the other sectors that aren't such big players are still continuing to make steady progress. So that was an important component of our plan as well. Funding in our plan, we recognize that at minimum we have pretty robust funding programs in Maryland that during development of our phase 3 WIP, we felt were sufficient to get us to 2025, but at minimum we had to maintain those funding levels to reach our restoration goals. So that was a very important component of our plan. And then also our plan, we did include, at the time we had a surplus reduction based upon the practices we were going to put in place in wastewater and ag. we projected we would exceed our goal by about £1 million. So that surplus was another important component of the plan to give us a margin of safety and make sure, we had some wiggle room and adaptive capacity to meet our 2025 pollution reduction goals. So more specific, kind of drilling down a little bit more into that. Some other important themes we highlighted in our plan was that, and this gets back to what I talked about earlier, you need robust funding programs and incentives to get people to put practices, particularly in the agricultural community, to get practices in the ground. But also you need regulations like our permits at the same time. So you need the balance of regulations and incentives really to get to our pollution reduction goals. We also recognize that we really needed to use the capacity we had. Our wastewater treatment plants aren't fully, aren't maxed out. They're not at full capacity. So we need to use that additional capacity, pollution reduction capacity in our wastewater sector to help get us to 2025 at the same time that we're making continued progress in the slower sectors. We also wanted to drive innovation and create a restoration economy through pay-for-performance approaches or market-based approaches to help drive restoration. The importance of making sure that these practices we put in the ground have local benefit, whether that's to flooding or climate resiliency or things like that are not only important to meet our bay restoration goals, but also are important to local communities and their local streams and local neighborhoods was an important theme. Leveraging conservation and protection, we need to protect the lands to also help meet our goals. There's other, the TMDL is a water quality focus, but there's also other Bay Agreement goals, voluntary goals, ecosystem restoration goals we want to meet and keep an eye on. So that's part of our plan as well, and continuing to adaptively manage through time. So again, these are some of the bigger themes and approaches we incorporated in our phase 3 plan to get to 2025. And really important, and this is, Erin's going to talk about her local perspectives next, but a lot of this implementation is done by local governments, by farmers, by individual property owners as well. And we really recognize that to be successful, we had to engage, and this was actually also one of EPA's expectations, that we would engage our local communities in restoration. So one thing we did in Maryland was, and this is just a picture of one of our counties, we met with the counties during our WIP development, and we work with them talking about those different sectors, whether it's wastewater or agricultural. We worked with our local governments to set goals to see what they could reasonably achieve between now and 2025 in terms of pollution reductions, and set those local goals that can help set some more locally based targets that we can shoot for to meet our bay restoration goals. So that local engagement, setting local goals, was also a really important component of our WIP, and important collaboration with our local partners and local implementers. That's so important. What were some of the challenges we faced? And this slide is about some of the challenges we knew at the time that we developed the phase 3 WIP. So we knew just getting to 2025 was going to be a challenge, particularly in the agricultural sector, because you really need, they're not regulated under the Federal Clean Water Act. So, you don't have, unless they are in limited ways, like for CAFOs, and I'm using jargon there, but by and large, we don't regulate the agricultural community. So you need to have funding programs, right? Farmers are trying to make a profit. They have a day job. So you need to bring the technical resources into farmers to get pollution reduction practices on the ground. So with agriculture being about 50% of what we needed to get to our goals, we knew that was going to be a challenge. We needed more technical assistance and boots on the ground to help our farmers. Also, we recognize the importance of green infrastructure, green solutions like trees, but setting goals for, tree planting or, tree canopy is really, it's difficult to set goals that you can really achieve. You get into all kind of complications with landowner permissions, and it's not, there's a lot involved with with that, and we struggled to set tree goals, even though, you know, those kind of green practices are really some of the cheapest, and, you know, have some of the greatest co-benefits, not only to water quality, but, you know, climate, greenhouse gas mitigation, and other benefits. So those were some challenges. And then also, how are we going to maintain those reductions after 2025? So accounting for new growth in loads, how are we going to deal with that? You know, if the climate's continuing to we're seeing more, you know, greater precipitation, the projections are higher on the trajectory we're on. How are we going to deal with those climate change impacts and stay within our pollution goals? And then Conowingo. Conowingo is a really interesting one that we're working on. Actually, that's probably one of the best current examples of collaboration where all the jurisdictions are working together to achieve the loads from Conowingo. So that's and I'll talk about that more later as well. The graphic down here, though, kind of illustrates some of the challenges. If you look at 2010, kind of the distribution of loads, and then how that changed in 2020, what you see, just looking at wastewater, for example, the blue, you see that it's basically a smaller piece of the pie. So as we make progress in the kind of the easier sectors, the harder sectors become a bigger proportion of the loads that we have to deal with moving forward. So that's sort of a way to graphically illustrate some of those challenges. And then there were challenges we didn't see coming after we developed the WIP. We had some of our wastewater treatment plants, two of the biggest ones in Maryland, during COVID. There were a number of issues, but they basically fell behind with operation and maintenance of those plants, and pretty much resulting in almost, pretty significant failures in the treatment capacity of those plants. So that actually increased our loads by, we didn't expect that. We thought, wastewater, it's just a technology-driven process. It's that should be the easy one, but things can go wrong, and you need to pay attention to that. Now we're in a situation where we have to get back on track with those plants to and do better to meet our loads. And then you have other things come about you don't expect, like avian flu, which is something that the agricultural community is dealing with. It's basically another crisis that takes the ag community's attention away from things like restoration to things like, how am I going to keep my flocks alive and, make a profit? And, these things come into play that can really challenge achievement of your restoration goals and kind of change the priorities and change the focus in some of your important sectors that you need to work with. What are some opportunities? So this one's kind of a challenge and an opportunity. Federal infrastructure funding, we have a lot of money now. The floodgates are about to open, but there's also challenges with that. I make the analogy sometimes to the vaccines, in that, we had this, what was it, operation, I forget what they called the vaccinate. We had the government develop vaccines very, very quickly and effectively, and all of a sudden we had all these vaccine doses ready, and we're like, okay, we need to get the shots in the arms. How do we do that? The federal government just said, here you go, local health departments, get those out, get the shots in the arms. And it's a similar analogy with funding. We're going to have all this funding now dumped on local governments and state governments, and we need a mechanism, we need the capacity to get that money out. In the case of vaccines, they had to get the National Guard in. I don't know if you recall that, to get to distribute those vaccines. So it's a great opportunity with that funding, but it's a great challenge. It's going to be a great challenge to get that money out and spent on time. In Maryland, we have a 5 million trees initiative that was passed by the legislature. That's a real great opportunity to meet some of those tree goals I mentioned before. We also have Conowingo, which is, again, it's a collaborative TMDL. All the jurisdictions are working on. There's some really interesting financing and best management practice innovations that are happening in that process. Maryland's put 25 million into it, so there's Maryland showing a strong commitment. We're working with other partners in the federal government to get them to contribute to that, so there's a real opportunity there. And I put collaboration partnership squared because it's really a truly collaborative TMDL. where all the jurisdictions are working on that WIP, not each jurisdiction doing their own. So it's a really innovative and promising approach. And also as part of, we had a settlement agreement with Conowingo where they had to pay us some money as part of their relicensing, and we're using those for some ecosystem restoration and resiliency projects in the Susquehanna and in the Bay. So there's some really exciting things happening there. There's opportunities for carbon accounting to integrate climate more into the Bay program and bring, think about how do our pollution reduction practices also reduce carbon? Can we bring additional sources of revenue and markets into restoration by aligning carbon accounting and greenhouse gas goals with Bay restoration goals? There's opportunity there. And then the last thing I'll say on this is in Maryland, we have, this ties to kind of to the planning piece. In Maryland, we have a law that requires when local governments develop their comprehensive plan to have a water resource element that looks at the influence of growth and development on wastewater, stormwater, as well as water supply. So we have a real opportunity in there where we're in Maryland working through that legislative authority to get local governments to think about, climate impacts associated with new development, but also water resources impacts. So we have an ability to, earlier in the planning process to kind of plan growth and development and consider water resources impacts in that process, as opposed to late in the game where we're issuing a permit or something like that. So some wrap up and near-term next steps. As I mentioned, we have to get up those wastewater treatment plants back into compliance, and then support agricultural implementation, support the farmers to get the projects in the ground. We want to advance both green and blue infrastructure solutions like trees I mentioned earlier, also coastal wetlands, things like that provide water quality benefit and can sequester carbon. I mentioned Conowingo WIP and the innovative financing there. We need to continue to advance that, make progress on that very innovative and collaborative effort. Even though it is a very partner-based approach, we have had some litigation in the Bay program. So we really need to kind of advance constructive legal resolution and legal outcomes with our partners to continue to move our progress forward. And we want to continue to help lead and advance shared Chesapeake Bay restoration and partnership goals. So we still want to continue that collaborative process and work together on our shared priorities. So with that, I'll wrap it up. There's contact information and pass it on to Stuart, who will then pass it to Aaron. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. We're now going to look at the local county perspective. We're going to focus on Cumberland County in Pennsylvania. Elizabeth Grant, AICP, is a planning specialist at Cumberland County Planning Department, where she supports comprehensive planning and ordinance updates, assists with the county's ag conservation easement program, and is working to implement the county-wide action plan for Cumberland County. She serves in leadership capacity with regional conservation organizations such as the South Mountain Partnership and Capital Resource Conservation and Development. Erin Latavik, professional engineer, is the consulting Watershed implementation program countywide CAP coordinator for Cumberland and Center counties in Pennsylvania, and program manages CAPs in 10 other counties in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. She is a civil engineer and senior project manager at Herbert, Rowland, and Grubik, where her responsibilities include MS4 program consulting and municipal engineering. She is particularly skilled at facilitating public outreach, building consensus, and identifying creative funding solutions. Take it away, Cumberland County.
Thank you. Aaron and I appreciate the opportunity today to give our local perspective and to talk about how Cumberland County is addressing our portion of the 64,000 square miles of the Chesapeake Bay watershed. Next slide. So this map gives you a sense of the scale of the land area draining to the Chesapeake in Pennsylvania. In all, 43 counties in the state, or parts of counties, drain to the bay. And as of 2020, 34 of these counties have prepared countywide action plans that flow upwards into the state watershed implementation plan, like Matt was discussing for Maryland. With the Phase 3 watershed implementation plan, Pennsylvania focused on engaging local government at the county level to develop plans to achieve pollution reduction targets by 2025. The PA Department of Environmental Protection developed this approach, creating a partnership with the localities, and the counties serve as an ideal level of government to really provide this role, because we have frequent interaction with all of our municipalities, offering technical assistance, and also to landowners. You can see there Cumberland County is circled. It's in the south central part of the state, and it directly borders the Susquehanna River. Our plan for Cumberland was developed and adopted in 2020. And for us, definitely success looks like reduced pollution entering our local waterways and the bay, and momentum around best practices and strategies for clean water that include landowner stewardship, engaging municipalities and the public. Next slide. So there, the map on the left shows you our land use patterns for Cumberland County. And we do have variable land use as you move from the more highly developed lands on the eastern side of the county towards the west and southwest, where much of the agricultural land is, and then forested land is indicated in green on the map. The land use types are pretty much balanced between developed agricultural and open space forested land, with each comprising about a third of the total land area in the county. We have 33 municipalities in Cumberland County, and 15 of those are currently MS4 permittees, which are responsible for managing their own pollutant reduction plans to reduce the amount of sediment entering local waterways. There's two main transportation corridors in our county. There's Interstate 81, and then also the PA Turnpike, which is Interstate 76. And they kind of cross near the county seat of Carlisle in the center there. And having these major transportation network, it creates an increased demand for warehousing and other transportation dependent industries in the county. Much of our most productive soils are also located in this area along those transportation corridors. So there's really a priority and a need at the county level to preserve our prime farmland and retain large blocks of contiguous farmland. The county planning department works with state, local, and federal funds to manage a farmland preservation program with a goal to preserve 30,000 acres of farmland by 2030. There's two major watersheds in the county flowing roughly west to east to the Susquehanna. We have the Conneauta-Gwinnett watershed in the northern part of the county and the Yellow Breeches to the south. Both these and also several smaller watersheds in our county have very active watershed associations, and they're engaged in anything from restoration work, tree plantings, stream cleanups, and also water quality monitoring.
So Rich mentioned earlier the tiered structure. The tier structure for Pennsylvania was described. So here's Cumberland County's position in it to refresh your memory. You saw the Lancaster County map earlier. Cumberland County is within Tier 2 of Pennsylvania's portion of the Chesapeake Bay watershed. Tier 2 includes 50% of Pennsylvania's overall water quality Phase 3 WIP goal. So you can break this down into even smaller pieces and recognize that Cumberland County, when our goals are fully accomplished, will help accomplish 5% of Pennsylvania's overall Phase 3 WIP goal. Our planning team was provided about a week's worth of training from our Department of Environmental Protection in early 2020, and we put together a planning team immediately thereafter. Then the pandemic started. So we conducted all of our outreach for our plan remotely with a few exceptions. we wanted to provide a graphic here to explain a bit about how local achievement rolls up. Matt had mentioned earlier that there are different sectors. There's MS4s or municipalities, there's the agricultural sector, there are wastewater treatment plants as 3 examples. These are sectors that already have water quality requirements or voluntary goals. And the idea here is that as we engage those stakeholders and those sectors, their achievement contributes to our countywide action plan or the CAP, and all of our CAP actions contribute upwards into Pennsylvania's Phase 3 WIP. All jurisdictional goals are determined by the CAST Bay model, or the Chesapeake Assessment Scenario Tool. It models today's conditions in the Bay and projects long-term Bay conditions. It's comprised of GIS and other database inputs, which are listed here on the left-hand side of the screen. And these inputs are updated periodically through Quality Assurance Project Plan Procedures, or QAPs. One of our local initiatives is to work towards as accurate and timely inputs as possible, but you can imagine how complicated it is for multiple data managers to keep these data sets as consistent as possible, not only across 30-some counties in Pennsylvania, but across the entire Bay watershed. The modeling process is iterative for all of the jurisdictions, and you'll see next an iteration that occurred while we were in the middle of planning. So when Elizabeth and I are talking about local water quality goals, we're primarily focused on nitrogen. For Cumberland County, we were given the goal from Pennsylvania's Phase 3 WIP of 2.2 million pounds of reduction between now and 2025. As we were putting together our plan, the CAST model was updated, some of the reporting mechanisms were updated, and our goal actually increased to nearly 2.9 million pounds, a 30% increase over what we were already in process of planning for. So at the end of the day, our countywide action plan, if fully implemented, will actually only achieve 34% of our overall goal, or about 1 million pounds of reduction between now and 2025. So the reality of all of this is that, in a way, local jurisdictions and even state leadership are always looking at a slowly moving target, because as the model improves and as data reporting procedures improve, we almost have to pause and take a look back just to see how things have changed, how those things are interacting, and then flip back around, look forward, and decide what types of decision making we need to change to meet our new goals. So we have 3 realities in place here in terms of only meeting 1/3 of our overall goal between now and 2025. Certainly as a county, we could do more with more time, and it's not as if we expect that when 2025 happens that all work stops, but clearly, we're going to need more time to hit our targets. We also recognize that existing best management practice reporting is critical, in addition to scaling up the support services and funding that Matt had mentioned for the agricultural sector.
So Rich and Matt talked about the importance of partnership in implementing this TMDL, and it really helped us when creating our local plan to know there was already strong, active series of organizations doing water-related work in the county. And as Aaron mentioned, we created our plan during the pandemic, so we spent a lot of effort in 2020 and Zoom meetings with leaders of a lot of these organizations. And we talked with them about their current projects and noted where we could engage with them over common water quality goals through very specific initiatives. And those included documenting existing best management practices as well as building new ones. And we identified whether we would partner on projects that had existing funding or whether we could also partner on proposals that took advantage of developing a funding proposal together. So through this process, we identified needs and a source of funding for tools specifically to aid us in our planning process to target areas that could use improvements. And we developed a compiled GIS data sets to create a viewer that was really useful to a lot of our partners in kind of looking at landowner outreach strategies. And we also developed something called restoration reports for Cumberland County through a partnership with several of these organizations. And that's a landowner outreach tool that gives landowners an idea of what restoration opportunities are available for each property in the county. And it also provides agency contacts that those landowners can reach out to depending on which practices they would like to implement. So here's how we organized the effort to develop our CAP in Cumberland County. Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection met with county leadership and got the strong commitment of our commissioners and leadership team to participate in this voluntary effort. The Conservation District and Planning Department were the natural co-leads for this at the county level, and we were able to hire a coordinator for our CAP through funding provided by DEP. Now, most counties hired staff directly to perform the coordinator role, but we were one of the first counties to go with a consultant team, and that was where Aaron is with Herbert, Rowland, and Grubik, and also Lancaster Farmland Trust, serving with them to provide outreach support to our landowners, because we do have a strong agricultural community. And that really positioned us to have the resources we needed in best management practice, technical assistance, grant writing support, and also provided those trusted partners in the farm preservation community to speak directly to our county's farmers. And we also recognized early that agricultural land held the greatest opportunity for our nutrient reductions, but we also wanted to make sure we continued engaging municipalities in meeting local clean water goals, especially those that had MS4 permits who were already doing their pollution reduction plans. So we worked with these teams to identify BMP types that will have the greatest chance for adoption, and also review statewide recommendations that were provided for our county to determine feasibility of those and also capacity for our local partners to implement those. We mapped out existing and needed resources and a plan to pursue funding.
Elizabeth, or in my bio, it was mentioned that I'm a CAP coordinator not only for Cumberland County, but for a number of other counties in south central Pennsylvania. And I do think that our county partners are able to take advantage of our experiences in other places. Not to say they don't already have some peer networks, but we're certainly a bit of a third-party perspective that can that sometimes see more value in what's happening than you do when you're doing the work yourself. So we have had some regional success opportunities with respect to fundraising, partnerships, and Cumberland County in particular is a leader in our state with respect to their cover crop incentive program. So because I had institutional knowledge about the program, as other counties were thinking about implementing their own incentive programs, I knew exactly who to direct them to contact. So there's more of that peer-to-peer learning. I think there's been a lot of good outcomes as a result of that.
So developing our CAP gave us an opportunity to deliberately account for the implications of the planning processes we're engaged with and how they support clean goals for clean water and where there are intersections. So this is a matrix of recent plans that were under the scope of the Cumberland County Planning Department. We adopted our Clean Water Action Plan, which we've been discussing today. And we've also recently adopted a local climate action plan and hazard mitigation plan. And these both include mitigation and adaptation strategies and preparedness for flooding and other impacts that are amplified by the effects of climate change. Our comprehensive plan has stated conserve as one of our major themes of the plan. It definitely includes land and water resources. And our land partnerships plan considers recreational resources and open space preservation activities in the county. We're currently updating our land partnerships plan, and we will also be developing a municipal guide for incorporating green infrastructure in planning documents and site design for our municipalities. When we created our stormwater management plan, we worked very closely with municipalities, ensuring that they adopted stormwater management ordinances that were developed in concert with that plan.
Pennsylvania's phase 1 and 2 WIPs weren't incredibly focused on the ground action. They were more focused on strategy. The phase 3 WIP is focused on implementation at the county scale, as Matt had mentioned, is also the case for Maryland. So because I have an engineering project management background leading this group, I was very focused on what typical project managers think about every day: scope, schedule, and budget. So as we approached our project here and developed our goals and initiatives, we were always thinking about the who, the how much funding, and the time frame, so that we were confident that what we were writing down on paper and committing to was something that was realistic. So our CAP is basically founded upon these 4 principles. We knew that we wanted existing partners, agricultural, urban, and the like, to get credit for all the existing BMPs that they already implement. We also knew that just as importantly, new best management practice implementation on the ground and all of the pieces associated with that are very important to support and enhance. Fundraising is another key component that is, everybody's problem. And then of course the 2025 deadline, what's realistic to be done between now and in a very short time frame. So the plan is available on the county's website and also the Department of Environmental Protection's website. On the county website, there's a video outlining the details of the plan, which we recorded when we were undergoing the public review. Here's a consolidated overview of the content, starting with county programmatic initiatives. Elizabeth mentioned the number of county departments and existing plans that already.
Erin,
Yes.
Unfortunately, the penalty for going last is we're starting to run out of time. Can you wrap this up in another minute or two?
Sure thing.
I'm sorry.
So we had county programmatic initiatives, state programmatic initiatives, and also pollutant reductions, and then monitoring and data management work that we wanted to make sure our partners could take advantage of. At this point, our plan is complete. We're in year 2 of implementation, which is focused on landowner outreach, implementation, and scaling up our partnerships. We had a number of co-benefits that we utilized to be able to get additional stakeholders engaged. I'm sure across the country, these are all sorts of co-benefits that you can connect to, including soil, water, recreation, etc. We had lots of communications type graphics that in-house communication county staff were able to put together, which is really helping us save some dollars on implementation. And then I think I'll go back down here to our lessons learned. Our Chesapeake Bay office staff is really key to not only enhance communication between the local stakeholders on the ground that have a lot of the challenges and the ability of the state to be able to help us work through those things. We have lots of nonprofit organizations, and we recognize that their flexibility outside of the governmental structure is really key to our success. Planning tools and data, of course, are very important for good implementable plans. We have willing landowners of all different sectors that have interest in this work. Sometimes they're not in our key watersheds, which is something we need to balance. And then the last item in terms of lessons learned is funding. Grant administration, as Matt mentioned, with lots of dollars coming, not many people around to manage it. And currently now, because many grant programs have limited budgets, larger projects require multiple funding sources, which creates significant implementation challenges. We can provide our slides as well if anybody's interested in seeing the other content. Thanks for your time.
Great, thank you. Before we open it up to everyone for questions and answers, I want to ask Rich to describe again one of the truly amazing things to me about this, the EPA WIP. We talked about this before, Rich, the fact that under the previous administration, the federal funding source for the Chesapeake Bay program was either sharply reduced or almost cut out. And every year a Congress, whether Republican or Democratic, put all the money back in and even added some. That was, tell the audience about that, how that happened, please.
Yeah, Stuart, I think it expressed that it wasn't partisan program. It's gone between different administrations, whether you're at a local county, a township, a borough, a city, a state, a federal side. So in that case, yes, during the previous administration, they wanted to zero out one of the more effective programs for clean water. And the senior senator for Maryland, Senator Cardin, and the West Virginia senator, Senator Capito, two different parties, two different perspectives. They actually got together because West Virginia farmers, municipalities, et cetera, were benefiting by being at the table, as well as Maryland farmers, municipalities. And they not only get together to reauthorize the partnership, but they increase the budget significantly so that more of the funding would actually go out on the ground, that would go out to the states, would go out to the counties, conservation districts, et cetera. So even in a time when there's a lot of lack of bipartisanship, the Chesapeake was an issue, and its watershed was an issue that rose above it, and it got a significant increase. Again, the dollars going out to the partners, state partners, local partners out there as well. So I think it recognizes that with good science, with a huge umbrella or a huge tent where people get together and make shared collaborative decisions, not EPA alone, not a state alone, not a government or a business or an academic partner, but everybody working together. It does work, and it does get support across party lines and different perspectives of how you go about doing stuff.
Looks like Stuart might have frozen up.
Yeah, it looks like Stuart's internet might have gone a little funky. Here he is. Are you back, Stuart? No worries.
Obviously a conspiracy against us. I wonder, so to give an idea of the complexity but successful work of this, I wonder if Rich and Matt could list offhand the number of either federal and state agencies that they had to bring in. I think Elizabeth and Erin did a good job of doing that for the local level. But let's start with Rich and then Matt.
Yeah, so for the federal side, there was a unique thing that happened during the Obama administration. That is, we had an executive order from the president that essentially said he wanted to be sure that the full federal government was engaged in Chesapeake Bay restoration, and he laid out some specific asks that. So we ended up with 26 different federal partners. You think of the post office and thinking, you know, why would it be that? Well, they've got so many facilities across the Chesapeake, they reach all of us. They were at the table. Fish and Wildlife, Corps of Engineers, USDA in terms of NRCS, Natural Resources Conservation District. Department of Defense has a tremendous number of facilities across the Chesapeake and up in the watershed itself. So we had, again, 26 different federal partners. They had their own group that worked among the partners, and then the counterparts to the state secretaries were at what we call the Principal Staff Committee, and then our federal partners were essentially engaged at the Conservation District level, at the state planning level, depending on where they were in there as well. So we were very, very fortunate to A, have an executive order in place, and B, for our federal partners to understand at the Chesapeake Bay scale, they had a role to play, not only dollars, but staff, expertise, and to work most importantly at that local scale, whether you're Department of Defense, USDA, or Fish and Wildlife Service.
Matt?
Yeah, and it's interesting because we have a similar structure in place in that there's a governor's executive order in Maryland that creates what we call the Bay Cabinet. So that's that consists of multiple state agencies: environment, natural resources, agriculture, planning. We have Department of Transportation there. We have our university partners. We have University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science and University of Maryland Agriculture, Ag and Natural Resources, College of Ag and Natural Resources at University of Maryland, and there's others, Maryland Energy Administration. So And so we run, excuse me, but that's the decision-making body in Maryland. We have staff that supports that gets what our challenges are, where we're making progress, where we need to focus to meet our 2025 goals, and adaptively manage, and we work through that body to keep us on track.
Stuart, there's two other places I want to mention too within, as Matt mentioned, the Maryland's governor's cabinet has been very effective. We also have one of our other signatories is the Chesapeake Bay Commission. It's a tri-state legislative commission, Maryland, Pennsylvania, and Virginia. So we actually have state legislators at the table bringing significant legislation, either among all three states, or I've seen initiatives start in Pennsylvania, head to Virginia, going to Maryland. And the other body is the Local Government Advisory Committee. We've had a committee of about 35 locally elected officials, from townships to mayors to cities to city councils of all 6 states in the district, always being at the table and always reminding them that ultimately it's the local governments that are going to be drivers. And they were very critical to helping shape what we did in the TMDL. They looked at where we were ending up, and that is eventually to end up at the Cumberland counties and the Worcester counties and the Allegheny counties, to get it down to that county scale or conservation district scale as well. They were adamant that it needed to come home to the people that are really doing the work on the ground. So that partnership allowed all the dimensions to be at the table, at the planning table, at the decision-making table.
Great. Elizabeth or Erin, you want to throw in any other county agencies that you didn't mention before?
Well, yeah, if I may, I was thinking of following up from Rich's comment too. And then at our level, we're taking it to the individual landowner, the individual, constituent, the individual member of the public. And I think, having, especially having farmers who are adopting a lot of really, regenerative practices and are really excited about that is making a big difference in communicating that message from farmer to farmer.
Yeah, okay. Something happened to my control panel, Christine. I have lost the list of questions. I don't know. Rich, I can't find my list of questions. Rich, if you have them, could you?
I do have them if you want me to just ask some of the questions until you find it yourself. Okay, so this question is for you, Richard. So how much value do you place on things like rain gardens, pervious surfaces, and bioswales in new development, infill development, and existing streetscape or street retrofits? So in those sort of 3 categories, if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, certainly. So each of the categories, each of the practices you mentioned, the partnership actually has what we call a BMP, a best management practice efficiency associated. In other words, take something like a rain garden or street sweeping, that we actually had a panel of experts would come together and look at the published literature, technical information out there, and say, what's our best sense of the amount of nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment that's coming from this practice that's implemented as follows, and it has a clear definition. It could be the size of a rain garden or a particular type, or a linear mileage of a street sweeping situation. And then, as Erin and Elizabeth talked about, the partnership's CAST model, which actually goes down to a very small scale and is based on a 1 meter by 1 meter land use resolution across 64,000 square miles. There are 400 different practices, from cover crops to tree planting to septic systems and upgrades, et cetera, as well as a full suite for the urban, suburban areas as well. So that the partnership over time has added to those. And in some cases, as new science comes up for something like cover crops and different approaches to it, it'll add that as well. So as long as there's an accounting that the county and the state have confidence in, that somebody in Cumberland County put X amount of rain gardens in place, or green roofs, or street sweeping, or in terms of an embedded swale or something like that, and the partnership has an agreed to practice, that credit will go in place like Erin was describing there. And in the accountability system, it'll show up that Cumberland County has taken this much additional work. But we always go back to our monitoring system, which we're again fortunate to have about a 4-decade record of, to then see out of one of my favorite places to fish on the Yellow Breeches, has that actually improved over time? Is the Susquehanna getting cleaner, and is the Chesapeake Bay getting cleaner? So the science and the policy and the on-the-ground implementation continues to evolve. It gets burps in the system like Aaron and Elizabeth showed, absolutely. But we always go back to what we trust, and that is the data in the stream, and is it making a difference or not for local systems, drinking water, for the quality of those waters, and then the health of the Chesapeake. So the bottom line is, yes, over 400 different practices get credit as they're recorded and tracked at the conservation district or county or city scale.
Well said, Richard. And I think I'll just add that landowners that do these things voluntarily are very interested in the crediting system. I think some of the stakeholders that are regulated, like a developer who's required to put in best management practices whenever they're paving an area or putting up some rooftops, they understand the system, but the general homeowner, by and large, doesn't. They don't really recognize the value of some of the things that they might be doing on a scale across a neighborhood. So it's an interesting opportunity to be able to communicate with landowners about very, very technical, complicated system, but break it down to something that's relatively simple to understand. And I'll just mention that the Penn State University's Extension Service is one of Pennsylvania's partners that's really skilled at communicating with landowners about these really complicated water topics.
Great. Thank you. This next one is, so in addition to having a goal of reducing TMDL, what key indicators are being used to assess bay health? And to that then, are all the partners in agreement to use the same indicators, which we suppose could probably be quite a challenge. So if someone could begin the conversation on any other indicators being used to assess the bay health, and then to that, does everyone across the board use the same type of indicators to assess the health?
Yeah, Matt, you want to start out with, say, water quality standards or something, and I can pick up on it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll just say that, and maybe this will be a good segue to you, Rich, is so we have kind of two things in the partnership we're focused on, is the water quality goals, right, that we need to achieve under the TMDL. And that's regulatory, and Rich showed the standards that we need to meet aquatic life needs. So that's one aspect under the TMDL, but there's also the Chesapeake Bay Agreement, and that's really how the Bay program started. It was all voluntary when there's some monitoring that was done back in the 80s, and there was concern about the decline of the Bay. So at that time in '85, that's when all the jurisdictions first got together with EPA. And they signed the first Chesapeake Bay Agreement, which was voluntary. In any event, there's been a number of those Bay Agreements since that time. The latest one was in 2014, and that has all other kind of goals for living resources, for land conservation, for wetlands, riparian buffers, things like that, that we track within that Bay Program partnership as well. So I don't know, Rich, if you want to add on to that.
Yeah, so there's publicly agreed to, or partnership agreed to, goals for crabs and amount of females out there in harvest. There's ones for rockfish, for oysters, and for their restoration. There's goals on wetlands for tidal wetlands. There are also goals, as Matt's describing, in terms of public access and educating our K through 12 kids and getting them an outdoor experience. So there are numeric goals that are directly related to reducing pollutants, but also equally important, as Aaron and Elizabeth said, that to conservation of land and giving people access to local streams and rivers, to outdoor experiences as well. So, and all those are agreed to by all the partners. Eventually it comes to the governors and the mayor of the District of Columbia, the Chesapeake Bay chair, and the EPA administrator. But going up to that, we work with our land experts and conservation and planning folks, with our fisheries biologists. We have goals for healthy streams and map those out for all 6 states in the district, and have a metrics in terms of the bugs in there and the water quality conditions and the stream side conditions. Are those a healthy system for that type of ecosystem, whether it's a cold water fishery or a warm water fishery? So yeah, that's it's not all just about water quality. That's a means in some cases of the ends. Water quality is good, but we like the living resources that we enjoy, we recreate with, we socially connect with. We not only do forest bathing, we do Chesapeake Bay bathing. In other words, you don't need to jump in the water, but get out on a kayak or stand by the water and just smell that salt air and enjoy it, or go up on the Latort or the yellow breaches and just see a beautiful ecosystem out there. That's a piece of what we look and we value.
In terms of the consensus piece of that question, I just wanted to add that I liked Matt's graphic of that spectrum of what consensus can look like, because I think that's a really excellent explanation of how this partnership works, especially with respect to how many different interests, backgrounds, educational levels, you know, pick your parameter. There's a lot of us involved, and we'll never all agree on everything.
And I think too, Aaron, that there are places where we disagree, and those ones, they get elevated. In other words, we don't just stop. If we can't, we eventually go up to our cabinet secretaries. They're the only ones that vote. Everyone else, we have to get on that consensus continuum. You're either going to let it go by, but if you're on a hold, we'll either work it out or you were elevated as well. So we take consensus extremely seriously, down to the smallest work group to all the way up to our cabinet secretaries and our governors, to try to get as many people comfortable around the table that they can not only live with it, but they can get behind it. But if they can only live with it, then we try to keep moving along to get them behind it as well.
Okay, I think we have time for one more quick question. This one is for Aaron and Elizabeth. What one big takeaway would you give to this group from the last few years of your efforts?
I'll start if that's all right. I would just say that, you know, people really want to feel like their actions are making a difference. I really think that people want to be engaged on an individual level, you know, with local water quality, with those co-benefits that Rich really discussed. And like one of the things that I think has been a really helpful tool for us is, as Matt mentioned, Maryland has a tree goal for 5 million trees. Pennsylvania also has a Keystone 10 million tree program. And that's just been an invaluable resource for helping engage watershed organizations, volunteers, Boy Scouts, you know, any kind of level to get out and do a large scale tree planting and really talk about the benefits of trees.
I think my big takeaway is that change is hard, but important. And as Elizabeth was mentioning, as people start to hear more about this, they want to understand it, and they will talk to their neighbors about it, and they will bring it to their church, you know, to do a tree planting on their own property. So I'm excited about the future, because I think that this latest phase 3 effort is getting far more people involved at the property by property scale, and that's really what it's going to take to get this TMDL finished.
And what you just heard was not stage managed. Matt and I didn't pay off. Elizabeth and Aaron did it. Imagine that across 64,000 square miles, 41 million acres, thousands of local governments. You just heard people talking about a TMDL. There's passion about their landscapes and their land areas as well out there. To me, that's what the success is. Not a state agency or a federal agency doing it, but folks that are close to the landowners. Elizabeth was right. It's really about individual landowners, whether they're in the suburban, urban, rural, agricultural sector, they're foresters, et cetera. You get down to that scale and you get them to understand what's good for them and what's good for their downstream neighbor. That's when a TMDL like this has gotten out there and been effective and is changing positively for things that matter in Cumberland County, as well as in here in Maryland or down in Virginia or on the Eastern Shore in Delaware.
All right, thank you. It's time to wrap up. It is 2:30. So thanks to all of our panelists today, and thank you to you, Stuart, for moderating today, and for the division for hosting. We appreciate you and everything that we've talked about today. And again, folks, we are recording this session. It will be available up on our YouTube channel sometime on Monday. And I will grab the slides from our presenters and have them for you as a PDF on our website. Again, to register for our upcoming sessions or to get information on submitting your CM credits or a link to the recording, etc., head over to our website, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. Again, thanks to everyone for joining us today and to our panelists. Everyone, have a great weekend, and we'll talk next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks.